What if the 4th of July was just another summer day? No fireworks, no Declaration celebrations, no United States of America. In our timeline, 13 colonies defeated the most powerful empire on Earth and created a new nation. But what if one battle went differently? What if France never joined? What if Washington's army finally broke? Today we're asking, what if America lost the Revolutionary War? Act 1. The war turns against the rebels. The American Revolution was never a guaranteed victory. In fact, for most of the war, the British had the money, the navy, the trained soldiers, and the empire. The Continental Army was often hungry, unpaid, and freezing. George Washington spent much of the war trying to keep his army from falling apart. So in this timeline, the turning point never comes. Maybe the Americans lose badly at Saratoga in 1777. Without that victory, France sees the rebellion as too risky and stays out of the war. No French navy, no French money, no French troops. That means no Yorktown victory. Instead, by the early 1780s, British forces slowly squeeze the rebellion to death. New York stays firmly in British hands. Southern cities fall. Patriot militias are hunted down. Loyalists, Americans who stayed loyal to the crown, begin helping the British restore order. Washington refuses to surrender at first. He retreats into the countryside, hoping to keep the cause alive. But his army is exhausted. Soldiers desert. Supplies vanish. Congress has no money. Finally, the rebellion collapses. George Washington is captured, or perhaps allowed to go home quietly to avoid making him a martyr. The British have learned from past rebellions. Sometimes punishment creates legends. The dream of independence is over. Act 2. Britain punishes carefully. At first, the British government wants revenge. Some leaders call the rebels traitors. They want executions, confiscated land, and military rule. But Britain has a problem. The colonies are huge, the population is angry, and if Britain pushes too hard, the rebellion could start all over again. So instead of destroying the colonies, Britain reorganizes them. The 13 colonies remain inside the British Empire, but with tighter control. Colonial assemblies are weakened. British troops stay permanently. Taxes are enforced more strictly. The message is clear. You may have rights as English subjects, but you will not challenge Parliament again. Some patriot leaders flee. Thomas Jefferson may escape to France. Benjamin Franklin probably stays in Europe. Samuel Adams might be imprisoned. The most radical revolutionaries become exiles, smugglers, or underground symbols of resistance. But millions of ordinary colonists simply return to life under British rule. And slowly, something strange happens. America does not become independent in 1776, but it does not stay obedient forever. Act 3. A British America. Without the United States, the map of North America changes completely. The British Empire controls Canada and the American colonies together. Westward expansion is slower because Britain still tries to limit settlement beyond the Appalachian Mountains to avoid wars with native nations. This means Native American confederacies may survive longer and hold more territory. The frontier is still violent, but without an independent U.S. government pushing west so aggressively, expansion happens more cautiously. There is also no Louisiana Purchase. Napoleon may still sell Louisiana, but without the United States, the buyer could be Britain, Spain, or perhaps no one at all. North America becomes a patchwork of British, Spanish, French, and indigenous power for much longer. And slavery? That changes too. In our timeline, Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807 and slavery across most of its empire in 1833. If the American colonies remain British, slavery in places like Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia comes under massive pressure much earlier. Southern plantation owners would resist fiercely. There could even be a second rebellion, this time not about taxes, but about slavery. So instead of an American Civil War in the 1860s, British North America might face a huge Southern slaveholders' revolt in the 1830s or 1840s. History still finds a way to explode. Act 4. The world without the United States. Now zoom out. Without the United States, there is no American model of a written constitution inspiring revolutions around the world. France may still have its revolution, but without America's successful example, it might unfold differently. There is no U.S. president, no Washington, D.C., no Monroe Doctrine, no rapid American rise across the continent. Britain becomes even more powerful. With the American colonies still in the empire, Britain controls more people, more land, more resources, and more trade. By the 1900s, instead of the United States becoming a superpower, the world may be dominated by an enormous British Federation. Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, parts of the Caribbean, and the American colonies. But Americans would still think of themselves as different. They would still have their own culture, their own frontier legends, their own anger toward distant rulers. By the 20th century, British America might peacefully become independent, like Canada did. But it would be a very different country. Maybe it's called the Dominion of Columbia. Maybe it keeps close ties to Britain. Maybe it has a prime minister instead of a president. Maybe its flag still carries the Union Jack. It might be freer in some ways, slower growing in others, and less obsessed with revolution because its revolution failed. So if America lost the Revolutionary War, the world would not simply be America, but British. It would be a completely different planet. No United States rising from 13 colonies. No Civil War as we know it. No America stretching from sea to shining sea. No superpower built on the myth of 1776. The rebels may have lost the war, but the idea that people across an ocean could demand their own future, that idea would not die. It would wait. And one day, under a different flag, with different leaders, and a different name, America would rise again. And that's the world where America lost its revolution. What alternate history should we explore next? Like, subscribe, and remember, history only happened one way, but it could have gone very differently.